Welcome, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to the new Black Media. Family, this video is about Wabash, Arkansas, a town that confronts its buried history of mass killings of Black Americans. Charlie McLean was surprised to learn that he was related to one of the Elaine 12. It came out when McLean, 58, asked his mother earlier this year about the largely forgotten mass killings in his Arkansas Delta town a century ago when white mobs murdered scores of African Americans, but only a dozen black men were ever prosecuted for any crime during the disturbances. Quote, "When I got off the phone, I went back and looked at my notes, and I recognized the name Paul Hall," McLean said. The Elaine 12 were a group of black defendants sentenced to death for what transpired in the autumn of 1919 after an all-white jury found them guilty within 8 minutes. Black witnesses later testified that they had been tortured into giving false testimonies, and the 12 were eventually released, though no white people were ever charged for any crime. "It was a kangaroo trial," said Audrey Evans, a retired federal judge, who was part of the planning committee for the Elaine Massacre Memorial in nearby Helena. They are now preparing to commemorate the town's bloody and largely forgotten past. What happened a century ago is still a point of contention, but the general consensus today is this: a white mob, upset over African Americans organizing to demand fair wages, descended upon a church in the township of Hoop Spur, just up the road from Elaine, on September 31st, 1919. A shot was fired, by which side is still up for debate, and a white man was killed. News of a black insurrection spread to neighboring communities, and hundreds more white men poured in, including federal troops, the Arkansas governor Charles Breaux, and newly deputized soldiers from the American Legion. The violence spread beyond the church to more communities, and African Americans were killed in their homes and streets. There's a commonly told story of a family who were off celebrating their son's return from the First World War, who were pulled off of a train on their way home and killed. In the end, hundreds of African Americans were reportedly killed. The most frequently touted number is 237, but some observers say the number could be more than 800, which would make it the deadliest massacre of African Americans in United States history. Well, family, before I go on, let me just say that it's odd that they tout a number as low as 237, but yet some observers say it could be more than 800. We're going to lean towards the latter, that it was probably and more than likely more than 800. One thing we know about white historians and white leaders in this country is they fail to tell the truth, and especially when it comes to foundational black Americans. That is the truth. So I digress. It says, quote, "It's hard without a number. A lot of people sort of gauge these, rank these by the number of dead," said Brian Mitchell, an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock, explaining that they came toward the end of the Red Summer, a year where an unprecedented number of African Americans were attacked across the United States, including dozens killed in cities like Chicago and Washington, D.C. Quote, one of the things that's fascinating about Elaine is so much of what we consider the Red Summer was urban, big cities with immigrant communities and poor whites butting up against blacks for resources as blacks begin to migrate to the industrial north. Elaine is rural, and the dynamics are also labor, but it's more controlling, making sure things don't change, that blacks remain in their position, that they're not getting higher pay, unquote. You see, family, and before I continue, we're talking about a system, the system of white supremacy. I hate even referring to this system as such because we know for a fact that Europeans are not supreme or superior by any means. What I see, and especially in the first picture that I showed you in this video where you saw the black men surrounded by the white men with guns, is that I see constantly the docility of black men, the passiveness of black men who stand around with these white men who have guns, and you neglect to overpower them and take their guns. You see, in war, you either shed blood or you will be that blood that shed. Here in this picture, before I continue, I just want to state that here in this picture, here is a mound in a field in Wabash, Arkansas, that is believed by some to be a mass grave of victims of the 1919 massacre in Elaine. But I digress. Despite the horrific story, the news of the mass killings has been largely absent from popular consciousness in Elaine, and indeed the Red Summer as a whole is little known across the U.S. And that, my friends, is a damn shame. If you are a foundational black American, you should know this history, because this history is your history. Not only did McLean never hear about his ancestors' role as one of the Elaine 12 until recently, he also never learned about the massacre at all until he was in his 30s and had left Arkansas. Quote, imagine growing up in a place where something this tragic happens and you find out decades later, he said. McLean isn't the only one who grew up unaware of the tragedy that took place in a place he loved that has shrunk to a community of about 500 to 600 people. Faye Duncan Daniel, who grew up just down the road in Ratio, learned about the massacre when she got to college in Boston. There, she stumbled across it while researching another topic. Quote, if it wasn't mentioned, it was not given the kind of weightiness that would spark your memory, Duncan Daniel said, who was part of a small group of people gathering donations and resources for the future Elaine Legacy Center. With the centenary quickly approaching, more attention is being devoted to educating and investigating everything that happened so long ago. Next month, the Elaine Massacre Memorial will be unveiled and will sit directly across the courthouse where the trials of the Elaine 12 were held. The committees includes descendants of both the victims and perpetrators. Quote, the Elaine Massacre marked one of the darkest moments in our state's history, the Office of Arkansas's governor said in an email. The 100th anniversary is still re-energizing a statewide conversation about a tragic event in our history. The lessons that we can learn from 100 years ago are relevant today as we navigate race relations in the 21st century. I'm grateful that we as a state are taking the opportunity to remember the history and learn from it. Unquote. The issue of reparations has also arisen as victims, descendants, and activists start digging more actively into the past and demand justice, especially for the thorny issue of land allegedly grabbed from blacks by whites in the aftermath of the killings. Stories of stolen land have been passed down in families to the point where there are now calls to investigate the claims. Wendell Griffin, a circuit judge and pastor who chaired a truth-telling commission earlier this year, said a false narrative has been presented about what happened in Elaine. That narrative has disregarded and worked to conceal and or attempt to discredit reports that ownership of thousands of acres of land owned by black people in Elaine and South Phillips County mysteriously changed from black people to white people in the aftermath of the massacre, Griffin wrote. This is the new Black Media reporting to you. Thanks for watching.